Welcome to CityWorks, a co-production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Each month, CityWorks explores the challenges and lived experiences of working people on the job, at home, and in our communities. Food prices are crushing working families these days. Across the U.S., grocery prices have spiked 32% in just the last 6 years. Those numbers are even starker in New York City, where the cost of eating has soared by more than 50% in the past decade. The crisis is real, but it's not hitting everyone equally. What activists and scholars are calling a food apartheid is happening across the nation, including here in New York, where food insecurity is most severe among lower-income, female-headed, Black, Latino, and immigrant households. And it's set to get worse. The GOP's tariffs, immigration crackdowns, federal nutrition program cuts, defunding of food banks, and food assistance programs will all worsen this food apartheid. On today's episode of CityWorks, we have two of New York's most prominent people in the fight for food justice. New York State Assembly member Khaleel Anderson, representing District 31, including parts of Southeast Queens, South Ozone Park, and the eastern portion of the Rockaway Peninsula. Earlier this year, he was appointed chair of the Assembly Task Force on Farm, Food, and Nutrition Policy. And we're also joined by Liz Accles, Executive Director of Community Food Advocates, which has had some great successes in fighting poverty and hunger in New York City through advocacy and coalition building. This past spring, lawmakers in Albany said yes to universal free school breakfasts and lunches statewide, following years of lobbying by CFA. Liz Accles has been in the fight for economic and food justice for more than 30 years. Thank you both for joining us. Well, let's start with the grim. It's sort of not news to anybody that prices have gone up. I mean, coming to you, Assemblyman Anderson, what are you seeing up close? And is there a story you want to share that maybe shocked you?
You know, right now, when I think about my district and I think about the challenges our families have, even with the ability to put food on the table, it's a crisis. I think about the mother, single-parent household, lives in public housing here in the Rockaways, and is struggling to make ends meet. These are the stories that we hear each and every day, each and every week. And what I've done in my office is I've made adjustments where anytime that we're doing community member intake, when we're speaking to a community member who comes into our office for assistance, we're now asking, what is the status of your food security where you live, that we may be able to point them to a place to be able to get food, because that's often the primary challenge folks are faced with, but may not realize it.
Well, that's so interesting. So it's not what's the challenge you're facing in your family, but what's the challenge you're facing in your neighborhood. Say more about that. We've been using this term food apartheid. People might be familiar with an older and outmoded term, food deserts. I've also heard food swamps. Take us through the language you're using here and how you're looking at this in what's to many people kind of a new way.
Yeah, so food apartheid is the concept, really, that there are individuals who are facing systemic discrimination rooted in policy and economic greed, and in what impacts the food choices that many of our residents have. One of the rules of thumb I like to use to measure on whether or not we have healthier options is how many fast food restaurants are in and around the area and how accessible those fast food restaurants are versus how easy or hard it is to be able to grab a piece of fresh produce that's set to nourish our bodies. So the challenge that we're seeing in our neighborhood is even downtown Far Rockaway, where I am today, we have 3 to 4 major fast food chains within a less than 1 mile radius of each other, about 6 blocks roughly, give or take, between each other. But then you have 1 or 2 grocery stores in between that may or may not have fresh produce on any given day. These are the challenges that we're facing in our neighborhood and across my district and across Southeast Queens and, of course, across our city.
I mean, that's so helpful. So I'm hearing desert is an outmoded term because it's not natural. It's not a naturally occurring thing. Apartheid is part of the problem, but then you do have this swamp factor of kind of fast food, not very nutritional food. available where fresh food and nutritional food isn't. Now, we'll come back to the Assemblyman on this in a minute because you're heading up the task force that's got to come up with policy to address all this. But how are the Trump and GOP policy changes going to affect all of this? Just starting with the anticipated, I think it's $1 trillion over 10 years cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, the food program, that was passed by Congress in this so-called big, beautiful bill this summer.
Well, the cuts to food stamps, so or SNAP, is going to likely affect 300,000 New Yorkers. And I think one of the most important things in talking about the SNAP program is that it is and has been a structurally underfunded program for decades and decades, meaning that the benefits are not enough to help. So people run out of SNAP benefits 2 or 3 weeks into the month. So we're talking about a structurally underfunded program that have artificial barriers to participation already, such as some of the work programs. And what we're doing now is cutting deeper. So food insecurity is only going to skyrocket with the combined higher costs and the significantly less accessible.
And just remind us of the accurate picture of who actually receives SNAP food benefits, because I think the image is, the single mom with a kid, but that's not all who's getting this help.
Yeah, it's kind of across the board. It's income based. And vast majority of people are working. Those who aren't working, like this is part of the rhetoric around the work requirements.
Work requirements.
Right, is that people who aren't working either can't find work or have some limitation. It could be a physical, it could be mental, it could be significantly documented, or it could not be, right? So this expansion, and we've seen this on the federal level before with the federal welfare program. That was the blueprint that they started in the 90s, is putting up all kinds of barriers to access as a means to cutting back spending, ultimately the ability of families to make ends meet. And then you're also looking at what the other consequences are, the ripple effect, economic effects in communities, locally and through the whole food chain.
So coming to you, Assemblyman, Liz is completely right. Take ourselves back to the 90s. It wasn't Republicans, it was Democrats leading the charge to cut poverty by cutting spending, getting people off those old welfare programs. Now we don't even use that rhetoric anymore. It didn't work. There wasn't a lot of follow-up on poverty reduction and finding out whether there'd been the kind of anticipated impact. It did throw a lot of people off assistance and create new barriers and new stigma. Now we have an administration that says really it's just about being able to fund cuts for the rich. New York State's looking at, I think, something like $15 billion in lost money, part of it to a program that's always been funded, SNAP, by the feds.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's the challenge we're faced with right now as we go into the next legislative season or session. We're going to learn of the financial woes that are going to impact families across our state being able to access food stamps. Alone, there's something around $200 million in administrative costs that the state will have to take on now, and $1.1 billion, roughly give or take, in costs that the state may have to absorb as it relates to SNAP benefits. Yeah. So the challenge that we're faced with, is that we have folks in Washington that are so far removed from the average person that they think that folks are sitting in their basements or sitting on their couches collecting food stamps, and this stigma that was created in the 1990s about those who are working class people trying to put food on the table. The reality of the situation is that capitalism creates an inequity, it creates an underclass, and it creates this cesspool of lack of opportunity for my neighbors.
I heard the word basement, and as soon as you said basements, I thought of hurricanes. And I went back to Hurricane Sandy. And I went back there because that's where your story, as far as I'm concerned, begins. That's when I understand you started in this work. Could you tell us a little bit about how you began, what brought you into this position that you're in now, I think at the venerable age of not quite 30 yet?
Not quite 30. I'm pushing 29 here, but I'm grateful for it. Look, I got started a little bit before Superstorm Sandy in the community, trying to figure out how to solve some of our issues that government unfortunately wasn't able to solve. And so community coming together to organize for its own destiny. And so my story really comes from the community, which is our beautiful Rockaway Peninsula, that is a community that has rose from the ashes. We know how to deal with struggle, we know how to deal with conflict, and we know how to rise again above those ashes. And so Superstorm Sandy, as we're next month coming up on the 13th year anniversary of what was one of the most devastating things to impact our Rockaway Peninsula, with basements flooded, first floors flooded, businesses destroyed, train line out for 7.5+ months, give or take. These were the challenges that working class New Yorkers, middle class New Yorkers who live here on the Rockaway Peninsula were faced with. And those are some of the challenges that we've been able to meet head on, and were able to meet head on during the COVID-19 pandemic.
You were one of those leading a youth task force, right? Doing cleanup.
Yes, we did a ton of block cleanups. We did a ton of cleanups of people's homes and restoration in partnership with Building Healthy Homes. We did a lot of food distribution, and I remember then Ocean Village, now Arvern View, a community where myself and several other volunteers climbed up 17 flights of stairs in pitch black with flashlights, making sure that our neighbors had the food and water that they need. And we met a woman in 1701 in that building, 5715 Shorefront Parkway, who was thankful that we came because she hadn't been able to make it downstairs and hadn't eaten in 3 days. Wow. So these are the challenges that pre and post Sandy, pre and post COVID, that we're faced with as it relates to not just food insecurity, but making sure that our neighborhoods are safe and resilient through future generations and crises.
Well, we're going to take a short break and come back and hear more about how we need to address policy to relieve immediate crises like this that you just mentioned, Assemblyman, and how some of the work that you're leading, Liz, around that policy work is actually making a difference. So we'll talk more about that when we come back. You're watching CityWorks. Welcome back to CityWorks. We're talking about food justice, systems and processes that make healthy food easily accessible to everyone, no matter where they come from, how much they earn, or where they live. It could be real. Let me start with you, Liz. Yes. We have been hearing about how challenging the next few months are going to be, yes. But also how many of these challenges around food access, food pricing, the quality of food that people have been with us for years. Yes. And you've been in this struggle for years, and you've been on the advocacy side yes. most recently. Talk about some of your wins that have really made a difference.
Sure. So the biggest success that we've had, well, in 2017, we got New York City, our coalition called the Lunch for Learning Coalition, got New York City government to do universal free school meals in 2017. And this past May, our coalition, along with Hunger Solutions New York, 350 organization coalition, advocated to get New York State to do universal free school meals. And what that means is 2.7 million students in New York State will have access to free meals regardless of their income. And that overcomes decades of children being structurally divided in the cafeteria by income, poverty stigma plaguing the program, and meaning kids, even no matter how hungry they were, not participating because they didn't want to be labeled as poor. And we know that there are many kids that are middle income, working class, whose families simply couldn't afford the fees, and the families would go into debt, or kids would sit out and just say, I'm not hungry, when you knew they were. I just want to add, like, why this is so important. Why do we care about school food? It's one of the biggest infrastructures in the state that can assure households with school-age children get 2 meals a day in school. So you want to remove any barrier to a child participating. 2 meals a day for households struggling is 40 meals a month. And anyone that thinks about food access, 40 meals a month per child in school is a big deal for a family struggling to put food on the table. An estimated savings of $165 per month per child in grocery costs. So this is really significant.
There are some other beneficiaries too, though. I'm thinking particularly of where that food is coming from, because that's also been a subject of legislation over the last few years.
Exactly. One of the areas of work that we focus on is called good food purchasing. In New York City alone, New York City spends almost $500 million a year on food purchasing, and using that money towards values-based procurement, including local economies, worker well-being, environmental sustainability. There's huge potential there. So all of this, school meals throughout the country is usually the biggest food purchasing in every district.
And what a difference it can make. I remember Councilmember Gail Brewer talking about, why are we importing apples from Washington State? No offense to Washington State.
Exactly.
We're paying the cost and the environmental impact of bringing apples to a state that used to be the apple capital of the country,
right.
And still has many of apple orchards in its local area. I just got to ask you, Assemblyman, about the farm workers and how they're faring, and their employers during this period of ICE detention and abduction that has got so many people so terrified.
And I thank you for asking that, Laura. We saw recently a Honda plant that was raided by ICE. This is the challenge that many of our undocumented folks and folks who are working in our agricultural spaces are faced with. And so, we need to do our jobs here in New York to do what we can to protect New Yorkers. And that means that our law enforcement cannot cooperate with ICE.
Yeah.
The reality of the situation is that if ICE wants to do what ICE wants to do, they can't have cooperation from us in an effort to destroy our agriculture industry here in the state of New York. That's number one.
Are you excited, Liz, about the proposals coming out of Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic candidate for mayor here in New York, talking about city-owned groceries, free buses, cutting the cost of living for poor people and raising, ideally, people's standard of living and incomes is a huge part of his platform. What do you think?
Yes. I'm very excited that there is a focus on affordability, because if you don't get to affordability, like, that's at the crux of the problem here in New York City and nationally. Yes, we have a supermarket access project, and it starts with a similar premise than the Mamdani campaign, and that is the private market alone is not solving the problem of lack of access to affordable quality grocery stores. So we think public supermarkets is one important piece of it, but there are other pieces as well that need to be built out to ensure that every community in New York City has a healthy food ecosystem, with supermarkets being one important piece of that.
What difference does a grocery store being public make? What does it mean?
Well, it could mean having the ability to, someone referred to it like the military commissary model, where groceries are available at cost. So there's a way to make things, pricing more accessible.
So you're not siphoning off profits or making profits to give to shareholders.
Yes, exactly. So I think there are lots of different ways that could take place directly with the city running it, or with, or having a nonprofit run it, but with, some real, making sure it's a public good. Like, that's the key.
Well, that's so important what you just said. I mean, really what we're talking about, what you're both talking about, is kind of attitude shift.
Yeah.
Like, what is our intention with our food economy, with our economy? What's the point of it? Yeah. Is it to make money for some private shareholders, or is it to actually feed people and feed the people of the state? Is it possible, coming to you, Assemblyman, that in this moment of dire crisis, we really could see a shift away from the rhetoric we've heard for so many decades around neoliberalism, the freedom of the market, letting the market solve our problems? In many respects, the Trumpers, the GOP, is throwing that out. So can we throw it out from the more progressive side and come up with something better?
Of course we can, Laura, and it starts with us not being afraid of our own shadow. We have to realize and recognize here in New York that the great ideas that have propelled us to where we are as a city and as a state came from those who are willing to challenge the status quo, willing to say that what's happening right now is not enough. And my colleague, who will be the next mayor, Assemblymember Mamdani, has been that force to show us what's possible. When government says this is impossible, we need to figure out what's possible. Right. And I strongly support the city-run supermarkets as an alternative and an opportunity for New Yorkers to feed their families in this dire moment. The old ideas of yesterday are not working, and we have to try something new and not be afraid to try things that are new.
Absolutely.
So, to our audience out there, many of whom are active folks, many of them are union related, what is a sort of call to them? Let's start with you, Liz. What would you like people to do?
To engage. This, now more than ever, engaging in local, in state, in federal level policy and politics is critical. Overcoming fear, pushing forward, big ideas, not small incremental, but really what people are looking for are big, bold ideas.
All right, well, you have the most progressive assembly up there in Albany that we've had in years. What you gonna do, Assemblyman?
Yeah.
And what do you want people to do?
So first things first, I want people, particularly our folk in the union spaces, to coalesce. We're going to need coalition to pull us out of this one. No man, woman, or non-conforming individual will be able to get us out of this situation that we're in with federal cuts, with Trumpism, with food insecurity, without us coalescing. What we're going to do this session and even now is we're going to have these strategy sessions so that when it's time to run the play, we're ready, right? Strategy sessions in the off season to make sure that, and when I say off season, I mean the off season from the legislature, because we're out on recess at this time, but strategy sessions so that we can focus on how we can feed New Yorkers and push back against Washington. We're going into a historic election year next year, and the challenge is going to be on me and for others to deliver for New Yorkers who sent us up here to Albany to do the same.
Well, I am feeling a rush of confidence surging through me. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Khaleel Anderson and Liz Accles from Community Food Advocates. It has been wonderful speaking with you. And that is it for CityWorks this time. If you have comments or questions, write to us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu. And be sure to download the CUNY TV app, where you can watch this show and all of CUNY TV's programming. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for watching.